Hello and welcome to RachAquarelle. Today I am going to do a little tutorial or demonstration for you on my entire process for painting this scene depicting a mother cow and her newborn calf in a nice sunny pasture. And so let's get started. As always, I like to just start out with a sketch, and typically I do my sketches on a piece of scrap paper or copy paper or even in my sketchbook. I guess I was feeling a little bit confident today, so I went ahead and did my drawing directly onto my watercolor paper. However, there is a template of this drawing available for you if you would like it. There's a link in the description. And you can use that template. It is an instant download. Once you have it, you can print it, and then you can transfer it directly to your watercolor paper. You can do that a couple of different ways. I usually will just use some carbon paper, also known as graphite paper or transfer paper, to transfer my templates over onto my watercolor paper, and I have lots of other videos demonstrating that. I just so happen to not need to do that for this particular drawing. The other option is to use a light box if you have one of those. But if you don't have transfer paper or a light box, another good option is just to use light coming through a window. So you can just tape the template and your watercolor paper against the window, put the template underneath the watercolor paper, and as long as there's light coming through the window, you'll be able to very clearly see the lines of the template through your watercolor paper, even if you're using really thick watercolor paper. I tend to use 140-pound watercolor paper. This is Fabriano watercolor paper, but there's no perfect brand. Of course, using 100% cotton paper is always going to be the best, but this Fabriano paper that I'm using is actually not 100% cotton. It's only 25% cotton, and it's not quite the same as using 100% cotton, but it's different in ways that I kind of like, and it's also a bit less expensive than the 100% cotton paper as well. So I do like to use it, especially for illustrations. You don't get quite as soft washes with this paper as you would with 100% cotton paper, but I'm really big on just kind of experimenting and using what's going to work for you. The colors that I will be using for this painting will be Payne's Gray, Hansa Yellow, Pyrrole Red, and Sepia. You don't have to use these exact colors, but I found that they worked really well. But I think as long as you have a really nice bright yellow, maybe a little bit on the cool side or on the lemon side, that will work well. I didn't use a lot of red in here, but I like having a good medium primary red. I thought that that worked really well. And instead of a blue, I'm using Payne's Gray, but you could also use another very cool blue such as French Ultramarine Blue, and that would do the trick. And then if you don't have sepia, really any warm earthy tone will work just fine. So because I really want a nice sunny illuminated feel to this painting overall, I'm giving it a really sunny undertone. So I went ahead and I covered the entire background with my yellow. And then while it was still wet, I added in just a little bit of orange, so a yellow and red mixed together, just to give it some warmth in a couple of areas. And now I am adding in some Payne's Gray just to the background where it's a little bit more shadowy. And these shadows that I'm putting in are really important because they're actually going to enhance the feeling of this really intense, sunny, warm day. And I'm also, in addition to providing a template to you, I'm going to provide links to the photo references that I used for this painting. I often will combine multiple photo references because I almost never can find one single photo reference that I have really in my mind as what I want to do. And also, I really don't like to just kind of copy straight from photographs. I use a website called pixabay.com. These are all copyright-free images that photographers and other artists volunteer online, so you can use those without any kind of copyright issues. And even though that's the case, I still really prefer just to make everything my own and just to use photo references as kind of a jumping off point. So if you go into the description and check out the links to the photo references here, you'll kind of see what I mean. Because there's different aspects of these photos that I used that I wanted to incorporate into this image overall. But anyway, I digress. So I'm going to be spending here a lot of time just kind of developing the background for these cows before I even start working on the cows. And my primary objective here is to keep things very soft, very loose, and almost abstract, and really just focus on the color and the value ranges. So I need this background to be quite strong. I don't want it to be really washed out and too light in value, even in the sunniest areas. So you can see I'm beginning to layer in some more texture and more nuanced color, a little bit more greens, which I mixed just with my Hansa yellow and my Payne's gray. And then in the areas that are getting the most sun, I'm really emphasizing some of the drier grasses with these oranges and these nice textures in here. And then again, I need that shadowy area in the distance to really read as being shadowy, but I don't want it just to be flat and dark. So I am building that up in layers of wet into wet so that I can have a nice bold streak of that dark value, but then the rest is going to be more of a muted green. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of clean up my palette before I begin working on the cows. And I'll have to replenish my paint as I go. And my water as well. It's always nice to have some good clean water to work from. Now this might be a little bit surprising to see, but I'm actually mixing my Payne's gray and red. So this is almost kind of a violet color. And this is what I'm going to use to block in both of the cows. And the reason that I am kind of mixing this violet color is because I need these cows to have a bit of contrast with this background. And the strongest parts of the background are this nice, bright, orangish yellow. And if you look at the color wheel, you'll see that the complementary color to yellow is violet. So we'll get a really nice contrast between these sunny areas in the background and then the cows. The cows are kind of backlit, so the sun is lighting them almost from the other side of them, if that makes sense. So what I really want is this nice rim of light around especially the larger cow. So you can kind of see that there's just some pure yellow that I've allowed to kind of come over onto the figure of the cow. And that's going to be where the sun is hitting her and just kind of wrapping around her a little bit. And then the rest of her is not being directly lit by the sun. And so I wouldn't necessarily call it shadow, but it's getting a lot of indirect light or diffused light. So they will need just that little bit of contrast to really make them read as being realistic. And then I'm going to use some of this Pyrrole Red just to add a few spots of nice bright pink to the cow, because along with the lighting effect of having that kind of nice bright yellow rim around the contour of the cows, there's just going to be some areas where light is wrapping around underneath them, but it's making those areas appear just a little bit more red. And then I'm going to give her just a little bit of pink on her nose as well. And it's important in this phase just to kind of keep things relatively light because in essence, these cows are white with dark spots. So even though I'm painting these cows much darker than, what we typically think of as white or even beige, I still want them to be light in comparison with the spots that I'm going to be putting on them. So this is just kind of a base layer, and I need it to be very, very light. And now I'm adding just a little bit of definition. So these are not spots that I'm adding here. These are really just areas that are most in shadow. But again, I don't want to go really dark with these areas. So sometimes I think when we think of shadows, we think of just that contrast between light and dark. And so we can tend to take our shadows a little bit too dark. But shadows are not always dark because in this lighting situation where the direct light is hitting the other side of these cows, there's enough light diffusion that even the darker side of the cows are not going to be very, very dark. So we're not going to even get close to like a silhouette or anything like that. And again, the darkest areas on the cows should be the spots that I have not even begun to add yet. And if you have lots of uneven marks, if you look especially on my larger cow, you can see lots of uneven marks and kind of like watermarks. Don't let that bother you. That's part of using the medium of watercolor, and I know it's easier said than done, but it's one of those things that you kind of learn over time and with comfort to just embrace because it actually adds so much to your painting. So don't worry about having smooth gradients or transitions, or, if you have those kind of hard edges that you didn't put there purposefully, kind of just accept those and let them be because it adds so much character to watercolor paintings. And I think that that's really a big reason why people like looking at watercolor paintings, because they're so spontaneous and you get all of these unexpected markings. And people will think that you did it on purpose. Trust me. So now I'm just going back over the background with a little bit more intense yellow because I'm noticing there's some areas in the background that are either a little bit washed out or white, and so I just want to really make those intense and bright and sunny. I'm also just going to add little bits of yellow on the cows just around the edge where I think that some areas might need to be enhanced or some areas are catching a little bit more light than I initially painted them as. And especially on the small calf, you can already see it a little bit, but I put just a little dash of yellow on that tail that is kind of swooshing up as if it's just catching a little bit of light. All right, so we're going to start painting the spots on the cows now. I'm going to mix a little bit of a darker violet. So this again is just my Payne's gray and red. It's darker than the washes I had applied before, but it's definitely not the darkest that I could mix this. So there's quite a bit of water in here to dilute it because the spots on the cows should not be flat, one color or one value. Toward the top of the cow, especially on the larger one, we'll see this. The spots are going to be much lighter. They're going to be getting much more diffused light. And then as they go down on the cow into the broader area of the cow's body and they're getting a little bit less light, then I'm going to add more Payne's gray to this mix. And then finally, in the darkest areas, it's going to be a very pigmented mix of Payne's gray and my sepia. And this is probably the only area in the painting that I actually really used the sepia. And I know that I always say this, but using a limited palette is really just the way to go, in my opinion. I definitely used to be one of those people who, I thought I needed like 20 colors on my palette in order to really get a complete painting done. But I find that I get so much more harmony with all of my colors, and it's easier just to make decisions and judge things when I only have to think about a few colors and then really work with those colors to see how they come together to create really anything that I need. So you can see here I have this mix with a lot more Payne's gray, and it's a lot more pigmented, so it is leaving darker marks. So anywhere on the cow that is moving away from the sun, so the further that we get away from the sun's reach, we want these spots to be a little bit darker. And again, don't worry about these colors and different values blending together in some perfect magical way. They don't need to at all. One thing that used to always drive me crazy about watching watercolor tutorials for beginners was that it kind of makes the impression on you that you have to be able to apply these perfectly smooth gradients and washes and that you're going to be doing that all the time. I almost never feel like I need a perfectly smooth wash or gradient or anything like that. In fact, I find that the harder I try to do things like that in my paintings, the less spontaneous and fun they end up looking. So here I'm mixing in the sepia with the Payne's gray to get the darkest parts of the spots. And I'm basically just focusing on the larger mother cow right now, kind of getting everything in place there. And I'll basically go through the same process with the calf. Now, if you've looked at my reference photos at this point, you know that the calf that I'm using for this composition is actually not a Holstein calf. I'm not really sure what type of cow this calf is. Maybe some kind of beef cow, I'm guessing. But I didn't really have an idea of exactly how I wanted to do the spots on this cow. I obviously didn't want to make them in any way identical to the larger cow. I wanted it to be unique. What I didn't know was, did I want to leave the calf primarily a very light color with fewer spots or smaller spots, because that happens quite a lot. And by the way, I actually grew up on a dairy farm, and I meant to mention that before, and this is actually a painting for my parents. So yeah, there's just a little bit of a tidbit for you. So I grew up around these animals, and I love how different they all are. I love how a cow can have a calf that has completely different markings from her. So I wasn't really sure exactly how I wanted to do this little guy. And basically, because he is behind his mother a little bit and away from the sun even more, he won't have as much of that nice sunny yellow rim around him, just because he's being blocked from the sun a little bit. And that's why I thought it would be a nice touch just to add that little swoosh of yellow on his tail, as if that's probably the only part of this little guy really getting much contact from the sun. So I decided just to kind of go easy with the spots, give him a few spots on his face and then his front part of his body, and then the other part of his body I won't have as many spots. But I'm doing basically the same routine as I did with the mother cow. He'll be a little bit darker just because, again, he is being a little bit more blocked from the sun. But starting out with that slightly lighter color with the Pyrrole Red and the Payne's Gray, and then going a little bit darker as I move further away from anywhere that the sun might be reaching. And for this calf, probably the most shadowed areas are the head and then the haunches, or, front shoulders. And now I'm just kind of looking for areas to clean up a little bit or add just a little bit of definition. And I'm using a little bit more sepia just to add a little bit more of like an earthy or brown color to the cows. And now what I want to do is add a little bit of texture to the foreground and a little bit more definition. So I'm going to be doing just a little bit of dry brush here in just a second. Needed a little bit more yellow. And then I mixed up another green with that Hansa yellow and Payne's gray. And I'm going in and trying to somewhat merge the more yellow areas of the grasses with the areas that have a little bit more green in them. And now I'm using my smaller brush, and I don't know that I would necessarily call this dry brush, but what I'm doing is I'm using quite a lot of pigment and not much water. And then I have a very loose grip on the handle of my paintbrush, and I'm kind of holding the paintbrush sideways or kind of almost parallel to the paper, as you can see. And then I'm using that just to kind of very lightly add in some bristly texture with the brush. So I wouldn't call it dry brush because I'm not really wiping my brush off on a paper towel to remove as much of the water as I can. But I'm using a very light touch and a lot of pigment and not too much water so that I can get some good texture just here in the foreground. So in the areas that are really yellow and orange in the midground, I'm not going to worry about those areas much. I just want a little bit of texture in the foreground. Okay, so we are done. I'm just going to get everything cleaned up really, really quick with the magic of speeding up the video, which is just great. And then I'm going to go ahead and take the tape off for the final reveal, my favorite part, because it just, I don't know, what is it about the tape? It's impossible for the painting to look finished with that tape on. And then you take it off and voila, it's magic. You have a complete and finished painting. So I really hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that you'll give this a try. Remember that there is a drawing template available to you if you would like that. And otherwise, I'm linking the photo references down in the description below if you would like to just work from those. And I thank you so much for watching as always. I hope you're having a great day and that you're taking some time for yourself to indulge in a little bit of creativity. And I will see you here next time. Bye.